is not none less than what we have for the other rules, right? We require RPA infrastructure engineer and administrator at the different phases of our project, right? Be it is an analysis phase or a design phase, or we are during a deployment, or we are maintaining the platform already exists, right? So here I am trying to list out some of the activities that are being taken care by the RPA infrastructure engineer or the administrator, right? So basically, if you look at the different verticals which are shown on this particular page, you will see during the different phases, RPA support or RPA infrastructure engineer or administrator is responsible for doing a lot of activities. Like during the analysis phase, RPA infrastructure engineer is responsible to understand the requirement of the project. What kind of server we do we need to have, right? If we are going from upgrade from one UiPath Orchestrator to the next UiPath Orchestrator, what all things we need to take care? So all those things will be taken care during the analyzing the project requirement. Then he'll also be responsible for designing the architecture of the infrastructure. I mean, he'll not be working alone, but he need to work with the solution architect and the enterprise architect to understand the governance and the security setup of the organization. But he'll be responsible for designing the architecture diagram, how the orchestrator will look like, and all those kind of things. So those are the basic things that will be taken care of the design phase. During the deploy part, right, when you are setting up the infrastructure and you are setting up the application, right? So these are the two phases. The first thing that you do is you set up the infrastructure, which is required for running your UiPath Orchestrator, like Windows Server, like databases, SSL certificate, network, VPN configurations, and all those kind of things. So those things will be coming in and deploy the infrastructure part. And then you have an actual deploy of the application, which is a UiPath Orchestrator. So that is also been taken care by the infrastructure engineer and administrator. And obviously, when the platform is up and running, there are a lot of activities need to be done, like maintaining a database, backup of database, purging some of the tables like jobs, logs, and all those kind of things. So this is a very high level view of what is the RPA infrastructure role and roles and responsibilities, right? So let's quickly move at and try to understand the UiPath architecture. Okay, and this is where I'll discuss about how the logical component of UiPath platform looks like, right? So if you look at the diagram, it has two sides. One is a client side and another is a server side. Client side includes those part of UiPath architecture which can be directly accessed by the user and the developer. Like you should be able to access the UiPath Orchestrator using the UiPath Orchestrator application, which is running on IIS, right? And then you have also UiPath Studio, which is basically accessing all the functionality like assets and other services from the orchestrator from the client side. And then you have a server side. In the server side, we basically have different component stacked on a top of each other, right? So we have a persistence layer, we have a web service layer, and we have the presentation layer. At the bottom of this architecture diagram, you see the persistent layer. That means where data your data is getting stored, right? So in the persistent layer, you have Microsoft SQL Server. I mean, Microsoft SQL Server is shown here, but you should be able to install your UiPath Orchestrator on Amazon RDS or any other SQL Server as well, like Azure Serverless SQL Server as well. And if you want to visualize the logs and the doing some analysis on the logs that is getting generated, probably you will need Elasticsearch as well. So that will be also storing the logs and other related information there. And on the web service layer, you have one of the most important logic there is API implementation and business logic. All the interactions that happens between the UiPath Orchestrator server through the different web services, right? So like configuration, logging, monitoring, queues, right? So you see all these core web server layer are responsible for communicating with a different component of the application. UiPath Studio communicate with the UiPath robot services, and then UiPath robot services communicate using all of those web services, right? Similarly, you have also UiPath Orchestrator mobile application. That's also communicate with the UiPath Orchestrator using the OData REST API endpoint. So this is pretty much on a high level how the UiPath Orchestrator architecture will look like. If you look at carefully, there are two really required components. One is you need a web server where the UiPath Orchestrator will be installed. Another one is a persistent database, right? So these are the two core components. And then rest of other components are like Elasticsearch is optional, Kibana is optional. Instead of Kibana, you should be able to use UiPath Insights, or you should be able to use Power BI or whatsoever. It depends on your need and requirement of your organization. But the core things for a setup of UiPath Orchestrator, you need one persistent database. That could be Amazon RDS, that could be Azure serverless, SQL or MS SQL server or data center, anything, right? And then you need a Windows server where the IIS will be installed, and that will be running the UiPath Orchestrator application, right? So let's quickly move to the next slide and try to understand what are the different options of the orchestrated deployments we have, right? So we have a different options available. One is a UiPath Automation Cloud, and that's basically available to you as a software as a service. So you don't need to worry about the infrastructure which is running the UiPath Orchestrator. It is being managed by the UiPath team. All the updates and everything will be taken care by the UiPath team only, right? And they'll be ensuring that your platform and your infrastructure is up and ready for use every time. So uptime is guaranteed by the UiPath. So all you need to do is you need to get a UiPath Automation Cloud license, and all other components like UiPath Studio and Robot will be sitting in your premise setup, and you'll be communicating with the automation cloud, and you should be able to perform whatever the task you need to do. The second option of the orchestrated deployment is third-party cloud, right? We should be able to deploy our platform on Azure or AWS or GCP or Oracle or maybe on Alibaba Cloud, right? All it needs is a Windows server and a database, right? And based on what kind of the workload you have, right? What kind of reliability you are looking for your infrastructure, that will help you to create other options, like do you need to go for HA, or do you set up replications and all those kind of things, right? For this third party cloud setup, basically you being a customer will be responsible for managing the setup, and then you can probably also take a help from a third party provider, which is AWS or Google, for example, right? So that's a second options you have. The third option which is available to you is on premise, where you should be able to install the UiPath Orchestrator on the Windows server, which is available inside your premise, right? Or there is also another option which is available from the last release is Automation Suite, right? And that basically takes care of the container services, and you should be getting a bundle of all the product together, and you should be able to use it, right? And again, this on-premise setup would be managed by the customer because it's your infrastructure. Your team will be responsible for managing and maintaining everything, right? So, and then you have a hybrid option, okay? So in the hybrid option, you will be splitting your on-premise component and the cloud hosting component. So as I discussed in the previous slide, that we have two core components. One is the orchestrator app, which basically runs on IIS, and another one is a persistent database. So you could probably have a lot of permutations, combinations there, right? You can set up your database on Azure while your orchestrator is sitting in your premise, right? Or you could have your orchestrator sitting in a public cloud on Azure or AWS while your database is sitting up into your on-premise. So there could be an n number of combination that could happen for this. And all it requires is if you have a connectivity between the database and the orchestrator is open. So if the connectivity or a VPN is properly set up, network setup is good, you should be able to use this hybrid approach where the different component will be sitting at a different location, right? All right, so these are basically deployment methods we have available. So let's talk about different modes of deployment, right? Different modes of deployment. So we'll be talking about single node, we'll be talking about the multi-node, we'll be also talking about HA and DR and all those kind of things. But HA discussion about the HA and the DR based, where we have active setup or active passive setup is beyond the scope of this, session. So let's quickly look at, if we talk about the single node installation, how it looks like. Okay. So when we say single node installation, that means we have only one UiPath orchestrator and we have only one SQL server, and we could probably or optionally we could also install Elasticsearch and Kibana. So single node deployment is the simplest form of deployment, and it involves hosting an orchestrator on a single machine. And this option is recommended when you're having a very less number of robots running into a production environment, or you are doing a proof of concept, or you have a small development environment. And this architecture is a pretty simple. All you have is your studios and robot connecting to UiPath Orchestrator, and UiPath Orchestrator is connecting with the SQL Server. It's very simple, but the problem is we do not provide you a failover plan. So if something goes wrong in a disaster recovery scenario, you won't be able to recover it. But it's best suited for a small development environment, right? All right, so let's quickly move to the other options we have available, which is multi-node deployment. Okay, so in the multi-node deployment, instead of using a single server of the orchestrator or a single instance of our orchestrator, we are using multiple instances of the orchestrator. So even if one orchestrator fails, other will pick up. And this is being managed by the network load balancer, right? So network load balancer will be responsible to directing the request that is coming from the orchestrator operator or a studio or a robot to a different orchestrator, right? And then you will have a SQL server, and then optionally you could have Elastic and the Kibana. So it's basically a responsibility of a load balancer to distribute the load between the different orchestrator we have. A single HA ability add-on which synchronizes the data between the orchestrator will be required, because it will be responsible for synchronizing the data between the orchestrator and ensure that if something goes wrong, it should be able to ensure that your business runs as usual. Okay, and that component will complete the deployment option also, because some of the nugget packages, right, if you deploy in a multi-node architecture, that has to be go on a shared network drive. While in a single node installation, you could save them on a same machine where the orchestrator is installed, right? So network drive could be used for these particular options. Now, I've seen a couple of people are asking about what about the scalability and business continuity. So we have different modes available, right? We have a HHA mode available. I mean, I have just given you a quick background around if we have a HA add-on available, how we should be able to control the disaster recovery. But we have also different models of disaster recovery where active, passive, or active are available, right? And these are pretty advanced topic, and we do not want to cover them into today's session. We already have a session planned for a multi-node deployment, and there will be covering some of these topics, right? So moving next, now, as I was talking about, when we're deploying in the cloud, right, or we are using a hybrid approach, right, where your database is on a different infrastructure or your Windows server is on a different structure, how it actually works, right? So basically, Orchestrator is a web application, right, which exposes a lot of several REST API endpoints and communication between the robot and the orchestrator, and the communication between orchestrator and the database engine, or similarly, the communication between the orchestrator and Elasticsearch, all happens through a web service URL. Means even if they are physically, at a different location, physical location is irrelevant, provided there is a network connectivity between those locations. So that means you should be able to install your UiPath Orchestrator anywhere from where it should connect to the database, or from where it should connect to Studio and Robot, right? Because Studio or the Robot services will be using the web services for the communication between the orchestrator, right? Having said that, let's look at what all things will be required for the single node installation, right? So this particular deck is basically talking about how we should be able to install a single node and what all things will require, what will be the software requirement, right? Hardware requirement could be different, right? Hardware requirement could be different on the basis of, scalability, or right. It could be different for the size of the deployment. It could be different. What are the number of, the robot you want to build, right? It could be also on the basis of whether the environment is a development or a testing or a production, because for production you might be using a high configuration Windows server, but in development you'll be using a less powerful Windows server, right? Or same is the case for the database. So the scalability and the reliability of your infrastructure will differ depending upon the use that you are going to use that particular environment, right? But for the sake of simplicity, I'm not including the hardware requirement. I'm including the software requirement. What are the software components that will be required for installation of a UiPath orchestrator, right? Be it is a single node installation or be it is a multi-node installation. So in simple term, we could say for UiPath orchestrator installation, we need these things, right? So we'll be needing a server OS, which is obviously a Windows server, and it can support 2012, 2016, and 2019, right? Similarly, for the databases, we could have a SQL server. It hardly matters whether the SQL server is on Azure or it's a RDS or it's from the Windows family or a MS SQL servers, right? Then we have a optional component which is for the logging and visualization, which is Elasticsearch. So as of now, supported model is a 7 plus, and similarly for logging and visualization, Kibana that would be required is a 7 plus. Apart from that, this component, because logging and visualization is an optional component, right? Let's put that aside for as of now. So what we need a server OS, which is a Windows server, right? And we need a database, which is from the following listed over the deck. And then we need a software framework, which is nothing but a software, setup that has to happen on the Windows server for our installation to go well, right? So we need .NET framework, which should be higher than 4.7.2. We need ASP.NET Core module so that the hosting and bundle hosting and all those things can be supported. We need IIS, which should be 8 plus, and we need IIS module URL rewrite so that your redirection could work properly, right? And I can see that is there a possibility of using a logging visualization tool aside from the LK stack? Yes. All you need is, it's basically using a nlog, right? So provided any tool which supports nlog connectors, you should be able to connect, your UiPath orchestrator to send those log to any third-party tool, and there you should be able to use it. Like one of, there are a lot of options available, right? All right, so let's quickly move to understand for single node installation, what all things we'll need, okay? And there is a beautiful documentation available on a UiPath documentation site, which talks about, what all things you will need before installing. So I'll go through that page. I'll help you explain how we should prepare before the installation, and then I'll be doing the installation, okay? So while doing the single node installation, we already talked about the hardware. Hardware is dependent on what kind of infrastructure you want to set up. You want to set up a production or a development or a testing, how many bots would be running and all those things. Software prerequisite we have seen in the previous slide. Then we also need some of the IIS server rules and features, right? So basically for UiPath Orchestrator as a web application to run, it requires a couple of features to be enabled on the IIS server. The best part about it, you don't need to do it manually. UiPath has provided a PowerShell tool. If you run that tool, you should be able to enable all those roles and features in a one go. Then the third thing that you need to talk about is the SSL certificate creation for the installation, right? And for the SSL certificate, it basically, you have a different kind of web certificates are available. So basically there are 3 types of certificates which are supported by the UiPath Orchestrator. The first one is a web certificate, which can be issued by any certification authority, such as GoDaddy, right? And the web certificate has to be imported in the server, obviously, because if you get it from the other third-party certification authority, you need to import that. Other option could be Your organization itself is a certification authority, and who can issue the certificate in a trusted Windows domain. So you should be able to use that certificate as well. And for the testing purpose or for a demo purpose or for a POC purpose, we should be able to use the self-signed certificate, which is not recommended for the production, because this certificate is not trusted inside the domain. And for that reason, you need to export the public keys, right? And for that, it's complicated the thing, right? But for the demo purpose, what we'll be doing today is we'll be creating a self-signed certificate, and then we'll be using that self-signed certificate during the our installation, right? And then we'll talk about how you should be able to install using the UiPath Orchestrator MSI, right? And we'll be also performing some, we'll be accessing the UiPath Orchestrator and we'll be doing the post-installation check. So with this, I'll stop the presentation and I'll go to the actual hands-on session where we'll be doing a single node installation on Azure, right? And I'll be going through all of these things that is listed here on this particular web, page. So we'll be discussing about IIS server rules and feature, and then SSL certificate, SQL Server requirement, installations, and all those things. So let me stop the presentation and share the Azure portal with you guys, and then from there we'll be doing the installation. All right, I think presentation is gone now, and you should be able to see my Azure portal, right? All right. So as I told you, there are a lot of preparatory work, right? Before you are doing the before you are performing the installation. So you need to set up an IP, you need to set up, the network group, you need to set up, VM and all those things. So I'm not going to showcase you all those things. Those things I have already done. So I have already a VM, okay, that's running a Windows Server 2019, and then I have a SQL Server, so which is this one. So I have this SQL Server UiPath demo, which is available on Microsoft Azure, right? And as of now, I don't have any databases on this. Okay, so I can showcase you that as well. So I don't have any databases on this. Okay, so I should be able to create a database from here before the installation can happen, or UiPath Orchestrator installer is itself capable of creating a database on a runtime. So if you do not create a database prior to the installation, UiPath installer will create it. The only catch there is the user that you are going to provide for connecting between database and the UiPath orchestrator should have DB owner permission. So if the user having DB owner rights, it should be able to create a database. It should be able to create everything for you. So this is my SQL Server, and I should be able to showcase you the database because as of now, it is nothing there, right? And now I have also, what I have done is I have created a VM. So this is a virtual machine that I have created. And on this virtual machine, I'll be installing the UiPath Orchestrator for you guys. So let me quickly connect to this UiPath Orchestrator machine using the RDP. All right. So I'm trying to launch the Windows Server where I'm going to install the orchestrator. So it's coming up. So you should be able to see it here. All right. And this is my server. So when you launch it the first time, this page will come. All right. So now let's talk about some of the prerequisites first, and then probably we'll talk about the installation. So you need to follow this page, okay? Because if you don't have these, ASP Core, hosting bundle installed, or URL rewrite is installed, you might end up, where your installer will say that please install these things and then proceed next. So you need to follow this particular page, and in particular, you need to install this IIS.NET Core module, and then this URL rewrite thing. Apart from that, other things are pre-configured there. And then I was talking about for the IIS, there are different roles, right? And the features, those need to be enabled. So UiPath team has done a really great job here. They have provided a PowerShell that can be downloaded from here. So for sake of simplicity, I have already downloaded it here, which contains the list of IIS modules and the features need to be enabled. So as for now, I have already installed those, but it's a pretty simple. All you need to do is run this PowerShell as a first activity to enable all of these features into the IIS. So these are the features which will be required for UiPath Orchestrator to run successfully. So let me quickly run it. So once you run it, what it will does is it will install
Please type in A, capital A.
So because I have already run this script, so all of these features are enabled. But if you run it first time, you will see that this step will be running for more duration because it will be configuring all of those features for first time to use. So that's the first step that you need to do. So after running this step, your IIS is ready to support the UiPath Orchestrator because all of the features are enabled. The next thing that you need to do is you need to install two other additional dependency, right? Which is this .NET hosting I have shown you in the prerequisite page, and then this URL rewrite. So these two things need to be installed. And once you install these things, you should be able to install the UiPath Orchestrator good. And if you do not install these things, what will happen is, issues like this will come. So if you don't, enable this feature, UiPath Orchestrator will say that these components are missing, please fix this. So this is a kind of error that you will get. So you'll be getting that UiPath Orchestrator requires following window features to be enabled. And to fix this issue, what I said you need to run this PowerShell activity. And by using this, you should be able to do it. All right, so we are good in terms of all the prerequisite we need to have for this particular UiPath Orchestrator installation. So let's quickly go now and run the UiPath Orchestrator installer. But before that, let's talk about the SSL certificates. Okay, so this will be also required. So you need to click on the home page. Here, and you need to go to you will see there is a option for SSL certificates. Sorry, I'm not able to find it. There it is here, right? So I have already created a self-signed certificate. So you should be able to create a self-signed certificate using this option here, create a self-signed certificate, or you should be able to create a certificate request if you want to use a third-party certificate provider. So you can create a certification request CSR, and you need to send that CSR request to third-party agency. They'll be generating the certificate for you, and then you need to come here back and import that certificate. The only thing that you need to know or need to note here is the certificate issued to field should match the host name of your orchestrator server. If there is a mismatch, you might face some issues while communicating robot with your orchestrator. So in particular, when the certificate is issued, you should match this issued to field with the host name of your orchestrator. So that issue will not come. Okay. So I have already created this self-signed certificate using this option. And this is a pretty, it will not ask anything. It will simply ask you for the name. And the moment you click on a create, it will be created. All right. So I'll close this. So we are good in terms of hardware, software requirement for the installation. and the SSL certificate. And I have already talked about that database. For the database, there is a prerequisite that is listed on a UiPath documentation, which basically talks about your role should be a DB owner role, right? So if you are a DB owner, you should be able to do it. Otherwise, if you are using installation using a different user, make sure that user has been given enough grant to perform certain operation on that particular database. And if it is not there, it will fail, right? So let's quickly go and start the installer. All right, so this will be the first screen. And here it will be checking all the features which are required for UiPath Orchestrator web application to run. So it's basically looking for all those IIS features. And if something is missing, you will get a prompt saying that that feature is not enabled. And as I have already installed those, so I'll not get that. So all you need to do is click on the checkbox, click on the install. Now, so here you have two options. So there are, certain other components which can be installed together, like UiPath Insight or test automation. So if you need to perform those activities, you should be able to select those from this particular, icons menu. So for sake of simplicity, we are not covering them because installation of Insight, installation of test automations are already planned in a different session. So there the team will be, helping you to understand how you should be able to install those components, right? So let's quickly click on the next without changing anything. This page is really, really important, right? Here you need to tell the host name. By default, it will take the host name. But in the organization, you will be using some DNS, right? So if you are using a DNS, you need to ensure that the CNAME should match the SSL certificate issued to field. And if there is a mismatch, your installation will fail or your installation will succeed. But when you try to launch a UiPath Orchestrator, SSL error warning will be thrown, right? And as I told you in the previous, example, that for my SSL certificate, the host name is the same. So you need to type the same host, issued to field here, not the full name, but the issued to field or a subject to be kept here. And then you need to click next. Right. So SSL certificate is good. We didn't get any error message for the SSL certificate, right? Now, here you have a two option. How you want to run UiPath Orchestrator application in an IIS. So there are two options. Some of the organizations are using their custom account, like a service account for run the UiPath Orchestrator because you don't have admin right. But certain other user is created who have less privilege than the administrator, but he should be able to perform those activities. So you should be able to use those account. And for that, you need to do a different setup. But if you use the application pool identity, it will work perfectly. So you don't, it depends on what kind of security setup your organization allows, right? So for sake of simplicity, I'm using application pool identity. Now it will come here. Now it is asking me the SQL Server host and the database name, right? So I'll go to Azure portal, okay, back, and I'll go to my database and I'll copy the server name from here. So I'll paste the host here. And then I'm not using the Windows integrated authentication, right? I'm using SQL Server authentication. So difference between these things are, it's a pretty obvious. SQL Server authentication means user is locally configured in a SQL Server. And when you are using a window integrated authentication, that means user is already a part of a AD group, whether it's a Azure AD group or a Windows AD group, and that information will be placed there. But for now, we are using the user, which is locally configured in the SQL Server. So I have a user, which is called RPA bots world. And then I'll be typing the password. Sorry. and clicking next. So here in the previous, this we have seen that it didn't ask for we did change the database name, right? But there might be a scenario you have, a database which is already created. So you should be able to give that database name. And after 2019, there is a slight change in how UiPath Orchestrator works. So now you have a two different setup. Identity server is segregated, which is basically responsible for your accessing and control on users and everything. So it's asking me that, do you want to use the same database, which is for the UiPath Orchestrator for the identity server as well, or do you want to create a new database? So it all depends on you. You can create a new database, or you can use the same database where our orchestrator is installed. So, and then in the third option, it is asking me for what is the name of SSL certificate. So there might be, different URLs and different database you can use, but for sake of simplicity, we are using the same server name as a URL because I have not created any CNAME, and this server is not accessible from the public network. So I'm just using the local name for it. And I'll click on the next. So it has taken all the information and now it is going to perform the install. Next, it is asking, do you want to configure the orchestrator elastic log setting? So we are not going to do that for now. So I'll simply skip this. Now, on this page, it is asking for creating a password. So as you know, UiPath Orchestrator support tenants, right? So by default, it will be creating a default tenant and there will be a host tenant. Host tenant will be responsible for managing the licenses, access, and other setup on a host level. And default tenant will be by default created. So it's creating a default tenant, right? Okay, so let me create a password for the host. And once this installation will start, I'll take up some of the questions from the chat and I'll help you to answer because installation will take a couple of minutes. And here you should be able to check this checkboxes if you want this password to be reset at the first login. But for sake of simplicity, I'm keeping the same. And click on the next. And now it's ready to install. So installation will start. So meanwhile, the installation is running. What I'll do is I'll take up some of the questions that we have in a chat window, and because it will take usually around 6 to 7 minutes to get installed. Okay. All right. So I have a question. What is the reason we are installing 21.10.5 instead of 22.4.1? This is a really good question, right? So as all of we know, UiPath supports two release tracks. One is a FTS and one is a LTS. It depends on what kind of resources you have in your organization. Are you going to frequently update your UiPath Orchestrator every year? Or are you going to use LTS, which will be available for next 2 or 3 years? And that's where you take a decision. I usually support and I prefer to go on a long-term support, LTS. And that's the reason the latest LTS, which is available as of now, is 21.10.5. And that's the reason I'm building it. But it's the same. Installation steps are same. And there is no change in installation step. I hope that helped. Yeah.
Satish, I want to interrupt here. Sorry for that.
Yeah.
From this release cycle, we have changed our LTS and FTS things. So now there will be no FTS version. So 22.4 is also an LTS version.
Okay. Thanks for confirming. I didn't know this.
No, otherwise, it's very new actually. So that's why.
All right, guys, do you have any other questions? Meanwhile, the orchestrator install is running. It will take another couple of minutes, four more, most probably more than 4 or 5 minutes. I should be. Asutosh is asking about the host password is the login password. Host is a super admin. Host is a super admin of everything in your UiPath orchestrator. And from there, you should be able to configure different tenant. You should be able to import the licenses. You should be able to distribute the licenses between different tenant and all those things, right? So it's a super admin. It's an admin of everything. Jalal is asking, do we have session on upgradation and degradation of the orchestrator? We have a few activities regarding how we should be able to update one orchestrator from so there will be covering the upgradation but not the degradation. So we have some topic planned for the upgradation.
Yeah. Also, just to remind all the participants, I have given the option to unmute. So in case anyone wants to ask a question by unmuting themselves, please feel free to do that. While the option to ask questions on chat is still open. Yeah. Continue, Satish.
Jitin is saying that I think documentation need to be updated, so there is option to add a storage location. That's correct. It is not there in the new installation MSI package. Previously, it used to be. By default, it's taking a file storage system. But you should be able to change this once you have installation done, and you should be able to go to the web config DLLs, config DLL files, and there you should be able to change this locations. All right, I think we are good. So installation is done. So I'll click finish. Okay. And now we need to go to the IIS first. Just wanted to showcase you what is the change here. So you can see the UiPath Orchestrator here. You can go here and you should be able to access the UiPath Orchestrator from here because it's using the port number, which is colon 443, or you should be able to type the address of the local host, which is UiPath Orchestrator colon 443. And from there, you should be able to also navigate to the UiPath Orchestrator. So it's pretty simple. So I'm launching it from here. When it is running first time, it takes a while to load because it's doing a lot of other stuff in the background. So just wait for a few moments and this UiPath Orchestrator page will come here. Can the installation be done on an Office system instead of server? No. It cannot be installed on a Windows operating system. It has to be on a server operating system. So it cannot be installed on your personal operating system like Windows 10 and Windows 11. But there is a capability in a UiPath where you should be able to run the platform as an automation suite. And for that, you need a high-end configuration. Okay. All right. So pretty much good. Our orchestrator has come online and I'm doing the first login. So by default, it's saying me to log into the organization, which is host. And the username will be obviously the admin. And I'll be giving the password, which I have given during the installation window. So I'll log in here. And from here, you should be able to manage your UiPath Orchestrator. So this is a super admin console. And I just wanted to showcase you one more thing here is we have an identity service, which is running separately. So this is UiPath Orchestrator / identity. So it has two. This is identity and this is the orchestrator. Okay. And from here, you should be able to, create different tenants, able to activate the licenses. So all you need to do is you can request for enterprise trial license and then click on the activate or activate offline. And you should follow the steps. I mean, we'll be covering this, how to activation and deactivations, will work, right? And then libraries, you can see all of these libraries are default libraries are there. And then you should be able to see the audits from here. And then from the settings, you need to perform a couple of settings for the first time of the installation. So basically what you can do if you want to engage, change the custom logo, you should be able to change the logo. Or if my UiPath Orchestrator is a production, I think I should say showcase a red this bar here so that I can identify this is a production. So I should be able to change some custom, or you should be able to put some messages here. And then there are some options here, like you should be able to set up a email alert. Do you want to use a modern folder or classic folder? All those settings can be done from here. This is the general setting. And then you have an application setting. There you should be able to put some privacy terms and all those kind of things. Also, you should be able to configure the deployment of the libraries and deployment of the packages. And then in security, you should be able to talk about run disconnected hours and all those things, right? And then this is also again about the WebSocket and long polling and all those things. There is a question: how do we set up the AD integration authentication in Orchestrator? That's a really, really good question, and we are going to cover that in a detailed session in the next session. All you need to do is go on this and then go on a management, and from there you should be able to change the authentication setting, and you should be able to provide a different providers like Google, Azure AD Directory, or AD Directory, or SMA. So these are the different options for external providers. You should be able to enable it from here. And you should be also able to set up password policy, how your password should be. It should be such a long character and those kind of things, right? So you should be able to do those things from identity setup. But we'll cover this, how we should be enabled to AD integration in a next session. Any other questions, guys? I mean, I think I am before time. Installation didn't take that time for the installation. Any other questions you need to ask, you are not able to understand, or you think I missed it?
Hi, Satish. Good evening. Thank you for today's session. My question is, like, generally I used to go to the cloud and then go to the orchestrator. I never came across these installations, all those things. So why do we need this orchestrator installations? I generally, I mean, I don't know, I'm new to this. I generally go in the cloud and then log into that cloud and then.
Yeah, so basically, it's so as I told you, we have a different options, right? It all depends where you how you want to use the UiPath Orchestrator, right? So we have multiple options. UiPath Automation Cloud is the one option that you are using. So basically that is hosted in a UiPath infrastructure, right? What about, there are a lot of banking clients, they do not want their data to go outside their premises, right? And they do not prefer to go to the UiPath Automation Cloud. They say that my orchestrator should sit in my on-premise, and that too on air gap. It should not have internet connectivity as well.
Okay. Is this for security purpose? Or?
Security purposes, scalability purposes, responsibility purposes, right? Those kind of things. Because when you go on a UiPath Cloud Automation, all the responsibilities of your infrastructure, keeping the UiPath Orchestrator up and running, goes with the UiPath team, right? So they'll be responsible for support and uptime guarantee. But when you are doing in an on-premise, right, your team will be responsible for managing everything. And that way you should have a finer control.
Is this orchestrator installation, is it going on in the organizations right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is the, I have installed it in my organization, one Azure VM. That's basically for a POC purpose for me. So that's how we do. When we need to do some POC or set up a new infrastructure, we use this. So the questions that you are trying to ask is, should we go for a automation cloud or on-premise? Is that what you asking?
Yes.
All right. So as I told you, it depends on what kind of deployment model your enterprise architecture team will suggest, right? And at the same time, it also depends on what kind of scalability and reliability strategy you want to follow. So organization to organization is different. My organization say you need to go on premise. Your organization might say I do not want to take a pain of setting up an infrastructure, database, and web servers, SSL certificate, and all those things. Let's buy a license and start running the automation in a 1 hour. So there you can go in a UiPath Automation Cloud, right?
Okay, so it all depends on organization constraints.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Satish.
Hi, Satish.
Yeah.
So my question is that you set up the virtual machine on the Azure cloud, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does that happen? Like, is there some documentation for that, or?
See, there are multiple ways of doing multiple ways of doing on Azure cloud as well. So for Azure, we have at Azure and AWS both, we have documentation available on UiPath portal. So if you go here and if you look at this Azure app service installation and AWS installation, so a detailed installation steps are available. But this documentation basically talk about Azure apps as a service installation, where you are taking IIS as a service, right? You are not setting up a Windows server and there you are doing all of those things. This is different. Why I followed that approach? Because the way I installed, all you need is a Windows server, and that Windows server could be anywhere. This Windows server could be on your organization or on AWS or on GCP, or it could be on Azure. The steps will remain same. But if you follow this route where you have Azure app service installation, you can also do it.
Okay, so what if there is no Azure or AWS available? How can that be done in that case?
That's the reason I shown you the basic way of doing installation. Say, for example, if you have a Oracle Cloud, right?
Right.
Or maybe Alibaba Cloud. So what you can do, first you need to do is two components are required. One is a persistent database. It could be again a MS SQL server or RDS or serverless databases, right? Or it could be a physical server. Okay.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And there you install the database, and then you can create a Windows server, and on that Windows server follow the same step, which I have done today. So basically, even though I am using a public cloud, right? But I am following the basic step instead of using their, a marketplace customization. So they have also the marketplace customization. They are, they'll provide you the script. Azure scripts are there. So the moment you run the script, think about a bigger organization where they need to install, 10 orchestrator or maybe 10 orchestrator each environment, right?
Right.
They don't need to follow this click, next one instance, right? What they can do, there is already a script, and you can run that script with the different parameters, and the parameters will take care of everything. And then you can see this. This is the PowerShell, and all you need to do is pass these details, and your installation will be done silently. You don't need to even look at the screen. So like this one, run this PowerShell action, where the package location would be, what is your Azure subscription ID, what is the tenant ID, and all those things. So you need to give these all details, required details here, and hit. Everything will be done in a command prompt.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
And same is the case for AWS as well. So for AWS also, we have a similar thing. All right. And Azure App Services, I think we are already covering a session, which is in our infrastructure community. So you should be able to see how differently we should be able to install instead of doing this Windows installer. Right. Julius, I think your question is, what is the ratio to bot to the orchestrator? It depends, right? What kind of, reliability and stability you want to your, but for, so basically what we do, I'll tell you how we do is, right? So before, setting up, the infrastructure or thinking about going for an orchestrator installation, we do some background exercise, right? So in a terms of, how many bots should be running, right? What should be the load on those bots? Are those bots running 24/7, right? And a lot of consideration has to be made, right? And on the basis of the consideration, you need to decide the sizing of your hardware requirement. So there is a beautiful document which is here, and apart from that, there is also a template available on a customer portal, 360-degree questionnaire, I think the name of that template is. And there you should be able to fill your requirement, for these many number of bot, what kind of web server and those kind of things. So say for example, see, if your number of bot is less than 20, you need a CPU which is of 4, RAM should be 4 GB hard. So using this, a table, because UiPath team has done a lot of testing to put these figures together, right? So you can take a reference of this, and then you can, extrapolate based on your organization need to go on a higher side or maybe on a lower side, right?
Yeah, Satish, I have few questions. Like, is there any health checks it should be done daily basis?
Daily basis, actually daily basis health checks are there, right? And basically what you can do is, again, it depends on what kind of monitoring you have set up, right? So there are a lot of, I have seen a lot of people, they have set up AI ops, right? And AI ops is basically, monitoring the infrastructure. AI ops, there are a lot of AI ops tools. So in my organization is a MoogSoft. MoogSoft is a AI ops tool, and that's basically look after if the services of UiPath Orchestrator are, available or not. If it is not available, it will be triggering, it will be creating a ServiceNow incident. That ServiceNow incident will be going to the Windows team, and Windows team will be looking at the logs to see that why Orchestrator is not running. So it all depends how you have set up a monitoring on the infrastructure, or probably if you because keeping your infrastructure up and running is a responsibility of infrastructure team, and infrastructure team already invested heavily in monitoring of the infrastructure. So instead of writing a new set of health check or new set of, inventing a wheel, you can probably utilize the tools and the capability your infrastructure team has, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and regarding the installation, we have GCP, Azure, and other cloud services. Can it be installed on physical bare metal server?
Yes, obviously, yes.
Yeah, that was my previous question. On premise, like on office, we have a server physical bare metal.
Yeah,
Can we install it? So I'm using the bare metal system.
You should be able to do it. You need to take care of the hardware requirement, how much CPU and RAM should be, and then you should be good. So basically, you need to take care of hardware and software requirement, and you should be able to install it.
Thanks.
Right. Any other questions? If not, I think we are good to bind this call.
Any final questions that you might have? I will still just once again request everyone to go ahead and join the chapter, which chapter link I'm sharing over here. So all the future sessions, I heard that a lot of questions were coming around sessions which are already scheduled. So please go through this chapter. You will already see a lot of these sessions, and any new sessions which are being planned, you will get notifications once you join the chapter. And then from there, you can attend, and please do reach out to me or Satish in case you have any particular requirements or any sessions that you would like to have. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sorry, there were a lot of questions around the recording. I have shared the event link on the chat, please. Sorry. Yeah, apologies for that. I've shared the event link on the chat. By tomorrow morning, the recording for the session will be uploaded over there. Please looking forward to in the upcoming session. Thank you so much. Thank you, Satish.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for have a nice day.
Thank you, Ankit, for joining.
Yeah, thanks Ankit. Thanks Vibhor as well.
Shishira, I'm not sure if you're there.
Yeah, Cicero is there. Yeah.
Please, if you don't mind Please come on camera.
All right, so next one you are publishing, right? So we are folder management is the next topic.
Yeah, we will publish that. There are a few sessions in prior to that will happen, which are already published. We will get back on that. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day. Thanks, everyone.